Hello Year 9, welcome to this first video as we move away from the poetry anthology and start looking at GCSE English Language Paper 1. So before we go any further, what would be really helpful is if you can make sure that you've printed out slides 11 and 24 if possible, that you've got a pen, maybe a highlighter, and you've got some paper to write with, or you've got a Word document on your laptop or computer ready to work with. Okay. Right, our lesson objective today is to make sure that we can understand how to answer questions 1 and 2 of the GCSE English Language Paper 1, but it might be a good idea to just put that in context. So the first thing to have a think about is that there are 4 exam papers in total for your English GCSE, 2 for language, 2 for literature, and on slides 4, 5, 6 and 7 you can have a look at how each of those papers is broken into different sections. For the language sections you have a reading and a writing part, and they're equally weighed, so they're both worth 40 marks. Let's just really focus on this one that we're looking at though. So it's Language GCSE Paper 1. It's called Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. So for the reading section, you'll get either the whole of a short story or an extract from a novel or a longer story. And there are 4 questions that you have to answer having read and understood that extract. The really good thing about this exam is that the questions will always stay the same, and you can see there that question 1 will always ask you to list 4 things. Question number 2 will always ask you, how does the writer use language to describe a particular character or an event or a setting depending on the story. Question 3 will always be, how has the writer structured the text to interest the reader. Question 4 is a bit of a strange one. You get a kind of a quote from somebody who's read the extract and they've responded to it. So it could be something like, when I read this I thought it was really exciting but frightening at the same time. And then it's, to what extent do you agree? So you've got to create an argument looking at the text in response to that particular statement. Then we're not going to focus on this in detail, but the writing section there, you'll get a picture or a word stimulus, write a story about fear, something like that, and it will ask you for a piece of descriptive writing or a piece of narrative writing. But like I said, we are focusing on the reading questions, and today we're really focusing on question 1 and question 2. So, although in the real exam in Year 11 you might get a text that's quite challenging and quite difficult, possibly a 19th century text, I thought we would look at an extract from a book that I've really enjoyed reading recently, and it's called The Explorer by Catherine Rundell. You've got some links on this PowerPoint, and I'd like you now to just watch the trailer for the book. That's a new thing, isn't it? A trailer, like a film trailer, but for a book, and then watch the clip of Catherine Rundell discussing the novel The Explorer and explaining the ideas in the book, it just gives you a bit of a context then. And I would highly recommend that you have a go at reading the book yourself, because I really enjoyed it. I've also put links to a school that's produced a reading of the whole novel, so you can listen to it chapter by chapter. So just get to know the book a little bit before we have a look at the extract. Okay, right, looking at the extract now. I've only got a tiny printout, so I'm going to have to peer at this tiny extract that I've got in front of me. But make sure that you've got your printed copy, that you've printed out slide 11. You've got that in front of you, and here we go. Like a man-made magic wish, the aeroplane began to rise. The boy, sitting in the cockpit, gripped his seat and held his breath as the plane climbed into the arms of the sky. Fred's jaw was set with concentration, and his fingers twitched following the movements of the pilot beside him. Joystick, throttle. The aeroplane vibrated as it flew faster into the setting sun, following the swerve of the Amazon River below them. Fred could see the reflection of the six-seater plane, a spot of black on the vast sweep of blue, as it sped towards Manos, the city on the water. He brushed his hair out of his eyes and pressed his forehead against the window. Behind Fred sat a girl and her little brother. They had the same slanted eyebrows and the same brown skin and the same long eyelashes. The girl had been shy, hugging her parents until the last possible moment on the airfield. Now she was staring down at the water, singing under her breath. Her brother was trying to eat his seatbelt. In the next row, on her own, sat a pale girl with blonde hair down to her waist. Her blouse had a neck ruffle that came up to her chin, and she kept tugging it down and grimacing. She was determinedly not looking out of the window. The airfield they had just left had been dusty and almost deserted, just a strip of tarmac under the ferocious Brazilian sun. Fred's cousin had insisted that he wear his school uniform and cricket jumper, and now, inside the hot, airless cabin, he felt like he was gently cooking inside his own skin. The engine gave a whine, and the pilot frowned and tapped the joystick. He was old and soldierly, with brisk nostril hair and a grey waxed moustache, which seemed to reject the usual laws of gravity. He touched the throttle, and the plane soared upwards, higher into the clouds. It was almost dark when Fred began to worry. The pilot began to belch, first quietly, then violently and repeatedly. His hands jerked, and the plane dipped suddenly to the left. Someone screamed behind Fred. The plane lurched away from the river and over the canopy. The pilot grunted, grasped and wound back the throttle, slowing the engine. He gave a cough that sounded like a choke. Fred stared at the man. He was turning the same shade of grey as his moustache. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked. "Is there something I can do?" Fighting for breath, the pilot shook his head. He reached over to the control panel and cut the engine. The roar ceased. The nose of the plane dipped downwards. The trees rose up. "What's happening?" asked the blonde girl sharply. "What's he doing? Make him stop!" The little boy at the back began to shriek. The pilot grasped Fred's wrist hard for a single moment, then his head slumped against the dashboard, and the sky, which had seconds before seemed so reliable, gave way. Fred wondered, as he ran, if he was dead, but he thought death would surely be quieter. The roar of the flames and his own blood vibrated through his hands and feet. The night was black. He tried to heave in breath to shout for help as he ran, but his throat was too dry and ashy to yell. He jabbed his finger into the back of his tongue to summon up spit. "Is anybody there? Help! Fire!" he shouted. The fire called back in response. A tree behind him sent up a fountain of flames. There was a rumble of thunder. Nothing else replied. Okay, so remember I said the questions never change in this exam. I've been able to use what we call the question stems, the first couple of words of each question, to create questions for this extract. So if you have a look on this slide now, slide 12, you can see that number 1, using lines 1 to 4, list 4 details about the boy. That's going to get us 4 marks. Number 2, using lines 24 to 42, how does the writer use language to describe the plane? That's an 8-mark question. Number 3, using the whole text, how has the writer structured the text to interest the reader? That's 8 marks. And then question 4, using the second half of the text from line 24. A student, having read this text, said the writer vividly describes the danger they are in and the children's fear as the plane crashes. To what extent do you agree? And that's a 20-mark question. So it's worth noticing that the marks build up as you go through, and that question 4 is really, really, really important. And sometimes we even suggest maybe starting with question 4, making sure you've done a really good job on that one, and then going back and do the others. But we will do it in order to start off with. So question 1, using lines 1 to 4, list 4 details about the boy. Okay, so first thing to do is to make sure you're looking at the right lines, because if you take any details from outside of those set lines, you automatically get no marks for it at all. So if you have a look at the screenshot below, you can see that I've first of all drawn a box around lines 1 to 4, and I know I've got to stay in that box there. And then the next thing I've done, I've used my highlighter pen to just highlight any information I can find about the boy at all, anything that I can see. So I've highlighted the boy sitting in the cockpit, gripped his seat, held his breath. I've noticed that his name is Fred. His jaws set in concentration, his fingers twitch, and he's following the movements of the pilot. He's watching the pilot closely. I've got more than 4 things I can write about there. So here's an example of how I'm going to start answering that question then. It's a list question. There's no comment, there's no analysis, there's nothing. You just grab the detail and you copy it down. It's probably best to write it in a full sentence. It's often good to make sure that you're focused on the question by using the word of the question in your answer. So you can see here that I have written, the boy is sitting in the cockpit, and that will get me 1 of my 4 marks. Can you use the text, and you can go back to slide 13 if you want to, can you continue to answer that question by listing another 3 details about the boy? So now you've had a go at answering that question yourself. You can see my version of this. There are lots of details to choose from, so don't worry if you've done different ones. As long as you have listed a detail about the boy, that will be fine. But I would get 4 out of 4 for this. I've written the boy is sitting in the cockpit, the boy is holding his breath, the boy is called Fred, and the boy's fingers twitched. It's a 4-mark question. We talk about a mark a minute. So you want to do this really quickly. You want to write as little as possible, making sure that you have actually, answered the question fully, and you're not going to drop any marks for this at all. Okay, moving on to question 2. Question 2 is now worth 8 marks, so the marks are beginning to build up a little bit here. It says, using lines 24 to 42, how does the writer use language to describe the plane? Okay, so this is a skill that you've been doing since you joined us at TCS in year 7. It's the Peter skill, or the P skill. Okay, And what I've got for you on this slide is just a reminder of how you can structure a Peter paragraph. Remember, you want to make a clear point. You want to give evidence from the text. The best kind of evidence you can give is short embedded quotations, preferably giving more than one if you can to back your point up. You want to try and identify a language device using the correct term. A way to get good marks on this question is to really dig into what a word means. You know, what does that word mean? What's it associated with? What do you link it to? And then start thinking about the effect that that then has on you. So I've given you some sentence starters if you need them. On the right hand side of this slide, you can see the mark scheme. Let's start off by just having a look at the level 3 mark scheme, which asks you to show a clear understanding of the language in the text. Okay, and you can see the 3 bullet points running down there. Start with the middle one because that's the easiest. Select a range of relevant evidence. So it says range. You're going to be working with more than one quote for range. You want a nice selection of quotes there. So that's your starting point, isn't it? Let's find a good range of relevant quotes first. Then you need to think about the language devices that the writer might be using. You don't have to particularly use very complicated terminology here. Nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and then you can start thinking about things like personification, alliteration, onomatopoeia, anything like that that you think the writer's using. But you'll notice that the top bullet point is always the most important one in the mark scheme, and it clearly explains the effect of the writer's choices of language. And that's the way that you're going to earn the most marks here. For a level 3, you'll be getting 5 or 6 marks out of the 8, and it's that clear explanation. You're really showing you understand why the writer chose those words and phrases and the intended effect on the reader. So again, job number 1, we've got to make sure that we're taking the evidence from the right place. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a box around lines 24 to 42. In the real exam, they reproduce this little extract for you, so that's quite handy. I haven't done that, but just locate lines 24 to 42, draw a little bubble or a box around them, and then the question is, how does the writer use language to describe the plane? Okay, so highlight anything and everything in that extract that is to do with the plane. So here are the quotes that I've chosen then. I've got the engine gave a whine, the plane suddenly, I'm reading off a tiny printout, I'm afraid. The plane soared upwards, higher into the clouds. I've got the plane dipped, the plane lurched, it went suddenly to the left. I've got the engine cut, the roar ceased, and then I've got the plane dipped downwards and the trees rose up. So those are my quotes about the plane, and that's plenty to work with. It's only an 8-mark question. You're going to be spending about 8 minutes on this, so you want about that range of good quotes. Next job is to think about those other bullet points in the mark scheme, to start identifying language devices and start thinking about the meaning and effect of key words. And you can see that I've done this with lines, those first couple of lines from the text then, 24 and 25. The engine whined. So I've got the onomatopoeia of whine. I've thought about the meaning of that word. My kids do a lot of whining, unfortunately. It's like a high-pitched, quite annoying, irritating noise, isn't it, a whine? It's often associated with maybe somebody complaining or somebody being in pain. Now, if the engine is whining, that's making me feel a little bit worried and a little bit anxious, because it might be suggesting that there's something wrong with the plane. I don't think I'd want to be on a plane whose engines were whining. So I've jotted all those ideas down there. to that quote. Can you carry on that process and have a look at the other quotes that we pulled out and see if you can identify language devices, think about the meaning of particularly interesting words, and then think about the effect. What is that telling you about the plane? How does that make you feel about the plane? So have a look at the rest of my annotations. See if there are any ideas you want to borrow. Sorry. Did you come up with something that I didn't spot? Have you got some really good, interesting ideas that I haven't come up with? Okay, now we've got to start constructing our Peter paragraphs, where we really do explain how the writer uses language to describe the plane. So you can see my first paragraph here. One of the main ideas about the plane in the text is how high it's flying. This can be seen in the plane soared upwards and higher into the clouds. The verb soared suggests that it's flying effortlessly higher into the sky. Soared is often used to describe birds, especially large ones such as eagles. This suggests that at this point the plane is powerful and reliable as it flies upwards. Also, the adjective higher shows that the plane is going further upwards. This may make the reader nervous as it's suggesting increasing danger as it gets higher. Okay, now I'm confident that that would get me into that level 3 bracket, that 5 or 6 marks. I've got a range of quotes. I've used the plane soared and higher into the clouds. I've identified 2 language devices, I think, verb and adjective. But the main thing is I've really shown my understanding of what particular words mean. The verb soared suggests it's flying effortlessly into the sky. It's used to describe birds, especially large ones like eagles. And I've explained the effect that has then. This suggests the plane's powerful and reliable as it flies upwards. So I think that that would get me at least 6 marks actually out of the 8 there. Okay, your job now is to see if you can use one of these points. You can do both if you want to, if you really feel like challenging yourself to continue writing in this style. So I've got the plane's movements are described in a way that sounds dangerous, and the writer also describes the sounds in the plane in detail. Okay, so either or you can do both if you want, and just following that Peter progress. Remember, you've got the writing frame if you need it on a previous slide. Can't remember the number, but it's there somewhere on the previous slide. And you've got my model paragraph as well. So have a go at completing 1 or 2 more paragraphs in answer to that question. Right, now it's time to do the work that you're going to send to your teacher today. You're going to answer question 1 and question 2 in full, but I've changed the wording slightly, so you've got to come up with completely new answers now. We've looked at how to answer both of these questions, and you can look back at the previous slides to remind you. Question 1 for you is, using lines 1 to 8, not 1 to 4, 1 to 8, list 4 details about the plane. Okay? And question 2 is using lines 24 to 42, which is actually the same bit of the text. How does the writer use language to describe the pilot? And that's your 8-mark question. Okay, so good luck. Remember, question 1, you want to keep it as brief as possible, the plane this, the plane that. But question 2, you do need to develop. Try and aim for 3 good paragraphs there. So somewhere between half a page and a whole side of A4. Okay, so look back on that model paragraph and see if you can develop an answer in that style. Right, your plenary task then is to begin to fill in this revision sheet to remind you exactly what you need to do for each of the questions. So you're going to fill in the question 1 and the question 2 box. For question 1, ignore the bit where it says the mark scheme, okay, but you can note down the marks available, the question stem, remember the words that always stay the same in the question, roughly how much you need to write for question 1 and what to include. And then for question 2, you do have the assessment objectives and the mark scheme for that, so you can fill that in a bit more detail.